Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to the Community and Infrastructure Services meeting for Monday, December 4th. We'll start with disclosure of pecuniary interests. Councillor Singh?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's the last item in the agenda on for renovictions, the report coming, some of the recommendations as outlined affecting landlords, as I have rental properties, as does my family. I am seeking advice from the Integrity Commissioner to see if this is an interest in common or a pecuniary interest. I don't have that advice yet. So for the time being, I will be recusing myself in the conversation, and once I have better clarity, and then identifying at a later point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. All right, we'll move on to delegation details. I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting. Interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, and hate speech or defamatory comments. One last reminder for delegations, please do not take offense at following your presentation. There are no questions from council. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. Right. We'll move on to our consent items. There's one consent item here listed as 3.1 Assisted Services Program Grant on the agenda. Do I have a motion for that? Thank you, Councillor Schneider. It was resolved that, subject to annual budget approval, Council provide a grant of up to $96,000 per year to the Working Centre to support the Assisted Services Program, winter sidewalk clearing, and that such a grant be adjusted based on the number of residential properties serviced year over year and be reflective of the operational costs incurred by the Working Centre to deliver services, and that the grant is not eligible to be used for subcontracting third-party commercial contractors to perform the services outlined in this report, and further, that the General Manager of Infrastructure Services be authorized to renew the grant agreement to provide the services outlined in this report and also in INS 20-010, subject to the satisfaction of the City Solicitor. All those in favour? We might not have had to vote on that, but thank you. Okay, we'll move on to discussion items, and 5.1, speed limits in school zones, DSD 2023-512, and we'll move to Mr. Aaron McCrimmon-Jones, our Manager of Transportation Safety and Policy, for a presentation. And go ahead, Mr. McCrimmon-Jones.
Thank you very much. Good morning to the Chamber. My name is Aaron McCrimmon-Jones, Manager of Transportation Safety and Policy, and I'm joined today by Barry Cronkite, Director, Transportation Services. I'll be providing some opening remarks regarding Staff Report DSD 2023-512 that is before you, speed limits in school zones, after which we would be happy to take questions and comments from the Chamber. Kitchener City Council approved a reduction in speed limits from 50 to 40 kilometers per hour in neighborhoods throughout the city in 2021. Additionally, Council directed staff to reduce speed limits within school zones to 30 kilometers an hour. The majority of our neighborhoods and school zones within the city have now been reduced to these lower static speed limits. Through Standing Committee in August of 2023, the following motion was passed by Kitchener Council: that staff be directed to report back with suggested school hours timing where school zone speed limits may be restricted to 30 kilometers per hour, but outside school hours could be 40 kilometers an hour in tandem with Region of Waterloo discussions. In November of 2023, Region of Waterloo Council adopted a consistent and static speed limit of 40 kilometers an hour in school zones on Region of Waterloo roads. In light of the region's direction, Transportation Services recommends a consistent and static speed limit of 40 kilometers per hour for all schools located on higher order roads, including major community collector and city arterial. This change would help address the challenges with 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limits on these higher order roads, which typically have higher design speeds, higher volumes, and would include streets such as West Heights Drive and Franklin Boulevard. Staff continue to support a 30-kilometer-an-hour static speed limit on our lower volume streets within Kitchener neighborhoods, including neighborhood collector streets and local streets. Since writing the report that is before you today, we attended the biannual ROSCO meeting. ROSCO stands for the Road Safety Committee of Ontario, and its membership is made up of municipalities from across the province. Kitchener canvassed this group about school zone speed limits, and the overwhelming consensus was that static and consistent speed limits is the appropriate treatment for school zones across the province. Transportation Services continues to recommend a static and consistent speed limit for all school zones, whether 30 kilometers an hour or 40 kilometers an hour, in an effort to develop consistent driving behaviors, prevent confusion, and to prioritize the safety of residents of all ages who utilize school properties throughout the year and outside of regular school hours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCrimmon-Jones. We do have some questions. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Jones, for this. Just a quick question, and I've always been kind of a stickler with keeping things consistent right across the board, and I get your point about recommendations of having it 30 at the smaller school areas and 40 with the larger, but are you concerned with any confusion among drivers, and what's the ramifications on that?
Through the chair to the councillor, there will be different conditions depending on whether it's a major road with higher volumes or a quieter local street. And I think we address that just based on the context and the design of that environment. But these locations will also be signed appropriately, and we can increase our communication and education to residents so they're aware of those differences. We will already have those differences because higher order regional roads will be 40 kilometers an hour and our higher order city roads will be 40 kilometers an hour, but the different context in neighborhoods and on quieter streets will be 30 if this is approved today.
And I don't know if you can answer this question, but the red light cameras as they come in, it's probably not the right term for them, but as they come in, do you know if it will be those higher traffic area roads at the 40 kilometers, will they be the first to get the cameras?
Through the chair to the councillor, we're working through the modeling for the next phase of automated speed enforcement, or ASE, and we looked at the top 25 schools on that list, the highest ranked locations. 21 of 25 are located on regional, major, or arterial streets. And of the 4 of the 25 that are on those lower order roads, we fully expect that those roads will drop off that top 25 list in the coming year because they had hotspot improvements in 2023 installed, or we are anticipating them to be have hotspots installed in 2024. So over the short and midterm, at least for ASE, the primary focus will be on those higher order roads.
Okay, thank you. I'm really happy to see this recommendation.
Thank you. And moving on to Mr. Mayor, please.
Well, thank you very much. And I do have some questions around where we're going with this, recognizing that, you know, while I appreciate there are different types of roads in terms of non-regional roads, they also do have an impact on people. And so I just want to understand, when there is a pedestrian vehicle collision that takes place, what's the impact of 30 versus 40 in terms of you know, injury impact on any students in front of those schools, i.e. if we increase to 40 as you're proposing now in those zones?
Through the chair to the mayor, We can relate this to survival rates, and this is partly what formed the basis for the neighborhood speed limit project that was adopted in 2021. For a vehicle traveling 50 kilometers an hour, the survival rate is about 15%. That increases substantially when a vehicle is traveling 40 kilometers an hour. The survival rate increases to 70%. Now, if a vehicle is traveling 30 kilometers an hour, that survival rate increases again to 90%. So the biggest increase is really from 50 to 40, but then we do see another significant increase when a vehicle is traveling 30 kilometers an hour or less.
Okay, the second question I have is, could we potentially have a scenario, and I know it's not ideal, and I'm not sure what ability we have because we're a partner, but we're not the operating partner of this system with the region. Could we have a scenario where the signs remain 40 and 30 in all the school zones, but we simply alter how we manage the enforcement of that? In other words, we manage it in a manner as if we treated it differently after hours as opposed to during hours.
Through the chair to the mayor, those are certainly discussions that we can have with the region, but to the point you made, we don't operate or set the laws around automated speed enforcement, but that is certainly something we can take back to the automated speed enforcement working group.
So who makes those decisions?
Those decisions will be made ultimately by the region, the operator of the camera. We just wouldn't know the impacts of potentially turning off the enforcement at specific times. We don't have those details or what we would be permitted to do at this time.
So regional, but we don't make those decisions as regional council, as someone who sits on regional council. So are you telling me that those decisions are being made by regional staff? Or is there some provincial guidance around this, or provincial law that stipulates how this must take place?
Through the chair to the mayor, there's a provincial working group made up of transportation staff throughout the province that meet to discuss the appropriateness of ASE and how to enforce and when to enforce. Municipal staff, so City of Kitchener staff, aren't part of that body, but the regional staff are. So again, in order to communicate our desires with ASE to that group, we would work with the region to make sure that is how we would do that. But the regional transportation staff aren't making the decision specifically in terms of when to enforce. They're providing that information and getting guidance from that provincial body.
But I guess it comes down again to, like, the buck has to stop somewhere. So who makes that decision is my question.
Through the chair, it's my understanding that it's that provincial guiding body that's been put together to work on automated speed enforcement, but we can confirm that with regional staff. I can assure you that it's not regional staff making the decision in a vacuum.
Okay, so I guess what I would hope to have ahead of making a final decision on this is actually an understanding, of can we in fact simply say that we want to leave the speeds the way they are, but we don't want camera enforcement during certain hours. And so that's a question that I'm really looking for, and I'll save my comments for later. But I think this is where the fundamental problem with what can be a very helpful tool is that we're not managing it in a way that I think can help us get the kind of community buy-in and support that we need, and through it all also keeping safety paramount for everyone. Like 20% better survival rate? If I was a parent of a kid of a child that's attending school regularly, I think that's significant in my mind. And so, that's where my concern is about going to a higher number.
Thank you,
I'll
Mr.
leave it
Aaron.
with that for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Obadani.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just needed some clarification of something. So we have here a minor neighborhood collector, I guess, school zones, and the major ones. How many are in the majors and how many are in the minors? And how do we classify the two as well?
Through the chair to the councillor, so in terms of numbers, we have 3 school zones on arterial roads, 13 school zones on major collector, and 18 on regional roads, for a total of 34 schools in that grouping of what we call higher order roads. We have 15 schools on neighborhood collectors and 23 schools on local streets, for a total of 38 school zones, what we call lower order or lower volume streets. How we determine how a street is classified, that's done through a master planning exercise, and the criteria is around the function of that street or road, whether it provides access to a broader community, access across the entire city or across the region, or more localized access. And the decision is also driven by the amount of volume expected on that road or street.
And just another clarification, the current, the speed cameras, they're currently located where the regional roads are. Am I correct on that?
Through the chair to the councillor, within the city of Kitchener, we currently have 4 automated speed enforcement cameras. We have 2 on city streets and we have 2 on regional roads. The 2 on city-owned streets, one is on Franklin Boulevard at Franklin Avenue Public School, and the other one is on West Heights Drive at West Heights Public School. The 2 locations on regional roads, there's one on Westmount Road at Laurentian Public School, and the other one is on Victoria Street at Sandhills Public School.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. The region did do the pilot project with setting the time periods for enforcement, and now they're suggesting they want enforcement around the clock. What is the benefit to student safety for enforcing that at 4 in the morning?
Through the chair to the councillor, there's probably 2 main points here. One being that school properties are community hubs outside of school hours. So they're daycares, they function as summer schools, they're bookable spaces, they're parks. So the intent there is to protect those locations outside of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. The other issue is around automated speed enforcement. If you have variable time of day speed limits, the cameras can only enforce during those timeframes. That's based on the province. So the cameras wouldn't be able to enforce outside of school hours if you have a variable time of day speed limit.
Okay, because I think the main point here is for student safety. And if I look in my ward on Franklin Street, I've got the Sunnyside retirement home with seniors. I've got the school. I've got the Stanley Park Community Center. All are very active, busy times. So, this is where I'm with the school zone timing. I had a constituent that received a ticket Christmas morning, which makes absolutely no sense, is doing nothing to improve student safety. So building on what the mayor says, I'm really a strong believer in following up with the pilot program where it set the times and days of Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So, excuse me, September 1st to June 30th. I think that people are aware, and I will be bringing a motion forward to address that.
So through the chair to the councillor, just if I may, in terms of time-limited enforcement, the one thing that we need to keep in mind is that there are really two ways to tackle automated speed enforcement and time limiting. And so if there are time-limited signs installed, there are a few challenges that we need to bear in mind. And so the first is that is the absolute in terms of when the ASE cameras could be used. And the second is that you then open up a window where there is a lot more debate of any tickets that are issued. And I say debate because what will happen is inevitably if you're issued a ticket at 5:59 p.m. from automated speed enforcement and your dash says 6:01, and so now you're taking that ticket to court and you're fighting that ticket because the times don't align. And so there is we would see, I think, an increase in terms of tickets that are debated and potentially tossed out through the court system. The one thing that I would say, though, the other way to enforce, and I think this is what Mayor Barry may have been alluding to, is that if automated speed enforcement can be restricted in terms of its time that is enforced on the back end, then that's probably and really is the most reasonable and best solution. And the reason I say that is because if we have static speed limits but we install ASE and we can restrict when it is enforced, then we can make sure that we're making common sense decisions in terms of enforcement, but that we can open up the time of enforcement to be indicative of that community hub and that community safety. And so it wouldn't necessarily have to be absolutely tied to the school system, but what it would do is allow us to enhance safety in those off hours. And by not advertising to the public when that enforcement actually incurs, you get the ancillary benefit of that reduced operating speed all throughout the day, all throughout the evening, even if ASE isn't in use. And so I think that we should keep that in the back of our minds when we're thinking about how we're going to do this, because signed, time-restricted, time of the day on street is an absolute, will cause a greater congestion in the court system and does severely limit what we can actually use ASE for, and can have a negative impact on the driving patterns outside of those operating hours.
Thank you, Mr. Cronkite. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Prior to the change from 50 to 40 and 40 to 30, what were the accident, I guess, the fatalities or collisions as before and after per pedestrians?
Through the chair to the councillor, I don't have those statistics in front of me right now, but what I would say is that Vision Zero the intent is to prevent and predict severe injury and death on our roads. And we know through Vision Zero, we should be focusing on vulnerable road users, where we have more activity on the street, especially where we have school children who may not fully be aware of how to operate and use a public street or road. So that's where we're targeting. A lot of our efforts are around those types of areas. So that's part of what ASE is striving to do.
Okay, thank you. And to go to your comments, Mr. Cronkite, the ASE, is it in any other regions across the province? And if it is, do you know if the courts have been flooded with questionable tickets?
Through the chair, yes, ASE is being rolled out across the province, and there are a number of municipalities that have been doing this for a few more years than we have, so there's a lot of lessons learned there. And one of the biggest issues with the variable time of day is, as Mr. Cronkite said, that is the only time the camera can be used and operated. And because of the consistency issue and trying to create more consistent driving behaviors, the large majority of municipalities, some of which are listed in the report that's before you, are implementing static speed limits and removing any variable time of day speed limits. And that was again confirmed when we were at Roscoe last week with a much broader set of municipalities from across the province.
Okay, thank you. And just my last question, you had mentioned minor, major regional roads, the neighborhood collectors. Can you send us a map or do you have access to a map just to highlight the different colors of all those local streets in the city?
Through the chair, that map is found in our official plan as well as our transportation master plan. We will email that to council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Deneau. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of my questions or maybe comments related to the questions may seem a little repetitive because I think there's a bit of a theme. As a lot of other members of council, including the mayor, have raised the same concern or question as to the direction that's being sought regarding a static enforcement of those outlined speeds. Now, hearing the argument from staff that schools, continue to be maintained as community hubs during off hours and potentially during holidays and summer break, how is that differentiated? Again, I think someone else may have said this or not, but differentiated from our community center, from our pools, and going a step further from our parks. Right? They continue to be a attraction point from a lot of our residents and a lot of our young youth that are going to these parks on their own, and we want to create a safe community there too. So why not there? Why here? Why this is more necessarily important during the off hours? I don't think there's any argument across this horseshoe at all that there needs to be a higher level of enforcement during the school hours when the large traffic is going to school and coming back. But beyond that, I'm looking to question where, if not other places, why only here?
Through the chair to the councillor, so the locations and the types of amenities that you've noted, those will be addressed through community safety zones. The region of Waterloo, working with each of the townships and area municipalities, will be retaining a consultant to help us identify the criteria to define a community safety zone. And that could be things like community centers, parks, busy retail areas. And the region of Waterloo has committed to installing automated speed enforcement at those types of locations once the majority of schools have been dealt with. So we fully expect to see automated speed enforcement inside of community safety zones in a later phase of automated speed enforcement.
But that's everywhere. I mean, are we talking about hundreds and hundreds of community enforcement cameras? I mean, look, it's fine. I like safety, then it's consistent. But I'm really questioning the practicality and reality of that ever coming to fruition. Yes, it can happen, but is it likely?
Through the chair to the councillor, agreed. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of locations across the region, which is why they'll have to be prioritized using a scientific model similar to how we work through our hotspot locations on criteria that we've agreed on.
And also, I mean, should the cameras be the only source of enforcement? Do we not still have a level of responsibility on those roadways where internal neighborhood streets that have schools on them or schools that are on major collector or major roadways? Should we not also be implementing hotspots in those zones also, irrespective of being a camera or not, so that if there is a variable speed enforcement time, that having that hotspot measures will also help to ensure that speeds are followed at the posted sign, even if it's not being monitored through a camera.
So through the chair to the councillor, going back to your previous question about, will we have these everywhere? As Mr. McCrimmon-Jones alluded to, there is the scientific component of it all. What I would expect to see, and what we support as staff here in the City of Kitchener, is a move away from installing ASC in school zones where it probably doesn't make sense, and really making sure that we're focusing on areas where it's going to have its greatest benefit. So that will be in future community safety zones, and I think so what you'll see is a combination thereof in terms of ASC being in school zones, ASC being in community safety zones, but only where it makes the most sense. In terms of hotspots and hotspot improvements in community safety zones and in school zones, again, yes, that's absolutely part of our plan, is to make sure that we're making these areas as safe as possible. That's why we created the hotspot program in the first place.
In my very remaining time, first of all, staff, I don't blame you with what you're trying to do. I think you're trying to put forward the most rational, the most logical, I guess, data-driven or based on your expertise as professionals. And we're trying to balance that based on the needs of the community, the feedback that we received, and more so the practicality of how people live their lives. And I think there's a bit of an imbalance. So to the last little bit, and I know I've gone over my time, my apologies. The last question would be, if the hotspots, the measures can be enough that enforcement's not required, right? I'm sure the hotspots, there could still be excessive driving even in that time too. I mean, the variable speed, there's got to be a middle ground between that. Are we able to put temporary speed calming measures in school zones also for the time being until more harder infrastructures put in that are hotspots in the school zone areas that would allow us to have variable time for camera enforcement while at the same time in the interim have some level of slowing down speeding through interim measures? Thank you.
Through the chair to the councillor. So as you know, through seasonal traffic calming, we do work on using temporary measures, and we found that our seasonal narrowings have been very effective as a temporary measure. As Mr. Cronkite mentioned, we are in discussions with the region about the appropriateness of automated speed enforcement in all school zones. And we're already going through our list of school zones to determine which schools are appropriate based on if it's a quiet street, if it already has traffic calming, if it's on a crescent or a dead-end street. It's our current opinion that they may not be suitable for an automated speed enforcement camera and probably wouldn't be productive for a camera to be in that location. And those cameras should likely be allocated to community safety zones, potentially, with much higher risks. So we fully expect our hotspots to reduce the number of schools that will ultimately get automated speed enforcement, but using a scientific approach, monitoring and using data and collision rates to determine the best traffic calming measure or safety improvement measure for those specific locations.
Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, and I do apologize for coming a little bit late. Hopefully I didn't miss too much, as I know this topic is rather important to me and important to the citizens that I represent in Ward 7, because this has been an issue that's been raised significantly to me. And anyways, I just want to follow along the lines of the ASE cameras and the timing and how those are set. Can they be set at any time?
So through the chair, that is something that we're going to work with the Region of Waterloo on, and it's something that will be fed back into a provincial group that generally makes the decisions around how automated speed enforcement is operated. I will say that I think there's opportunity there to do what council is seeking. I think that the opportunity is greater in using limited time of day that the public is not aware of with ASE rather than signing it on street.
Okay, because I have deep concerns. If we can't control the timing, then to me it's a flawed system. We should be able to control the timing. Because what I see is if we put cameras out, signs out there that has a time limit, let's say from 7 to 5, we should have the capacity to say 5:05. We start the cameras, and that would solve a lot of those issues with regards to enforcement and any debate of whether of timing or anything like that. But I'll let the debate continue. But I'm pretty happy with where this is going, in particular with West Heights Drive. That's something that was raised significantly by the residents I represent, and it was an issue. And I'm glad that it's at least bumped up to 40. I know the timing of it of enforcement is still very concerning to me, but I'll let and see where the debate goes with that.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Thank you for the report, guys. Question, is there data showing a difference in how fast drivers go, for example, in a 30 zone where there is no camera there and a 30 zone where there is a camera there?
Through the chair to the councillor, we don't have enough data at this point to compare school zones at 30 with a camera versus school zones that don't. That would take a little bit more work and probably a little bit more data collection to give you a fulsome answer.
Okay, yeah, thank you. This is where I'm going in general, because my anecdotal observation is a school zone that has a camera that's 30, which I've driven through often. People are going, 25 because they're afraid to go over that 30-kilometer limit. And school zones where there isn't, people are going, 35, 40 or something like that. So I think we really need to know that data before we set these absolute terms. My other question is that I'm not really understanding the inconsistency of having 30 zones and 40 zones. I guess if the data says 40 is more dangerous for collisions, then why are we permitting it at all versus the alternative, making everything 40 so we are consistent with the region? So can you help me understand that?
Through the chair to the councillor, staff's recommendation through the neighborhood speed limit project and council's direction was 30 kilometers an hour in school zones because of the increased survival rate and the street users in those areas. Having said that, we've heard the challenges from council and the community signing and bylawing a street that is designed for a higher speed at 30 kilometers an hour. And we're trying to find a balance and a middle ground to help solve that solution. So a 40 kilometer an hour school zone equipped with an automated speed enforcement camera provides a lot of safety benefit, and it helps address some of those issues, trying to get drivers to drive 30 on a street that's designed for a much higher speed.
Okay, yeah, that was part of what I was hoping would happen. Like I was hoping, I'm okay with streets that don't have a camera being 30, but having them transition over to 40 as they get a camera, but we need the data to prove that, right? So that's one of my issues. Another question is, I'm unsure of the finding, but I know if a police officer catches somebody in a school zone speeding, their fines are doubled. Are they doubled with speed enforcement cameras as well?
Through the chair to the council, they would be doubled in a community safety zone per provincial law. They are not doubled in a school zone.
They are not doubled in a school zone. That's helpful. The question that Councillor Deneau asked earlier too about injuries and fatalities, one of the questions I'm getting from the community is they really want to know, what the history is in school zones of serious injuries and fatalities. They want to know what the data of the problem we're trying to solve. You said you didn't have it in front of you, but is it possible to get that data?
Through the chair to the councillor, to clarify your question, you want historic collision data for injuries or fatalities within a school zone?
Yes.
Through the chair, yes, we can collect that data. And I just would echo the comments made earlier that Vision Zero and the modeling that we're working on is predictive. It's intended to determine the highest risk locations, and that's how we select our hotspots as well. It isn't just based on historic collisions, but it's looking at locations that have all the ingredients, whether it be speed, volume, vulnerable street users, and other characteristics of that area that could lead to a severe injury or fatality.
Okay, thank you. I'll have comment as well.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Okay, I don't see anyone else in line for questions. We can move on to comments now, if there are any. Oh, yes, sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, Councillor Schneider, do you want to move forward with your amendment?
Yes, please. I've sent it to the clerk so everyone can see it. But it's basically, I believe, capturing what we've talked about. And I do think there's a precedent set for people knowing that there are restrictions for certain things like left-hand turns and parking and stopping. So I don't feel this is going to create confusion if we have a time limit. The times reflected are the same times that were used when the Region of Waterloo did their pilot project. And I believe it's fair to constituents. It gets the student safety we want during school hours. And this is something that Councillor Singh and I both worked on together, so.
Okay, did you want to speak further to that, or I'm just seeing it now for the first time, so. Councillor Singh, did you want to speak to this?
There's someone ahead of me, is there? There was someone ahead of me. I'm making hard for you, I will. Fine. You know, one of the things I enjoy about this council is the fact that we always work collaboratively. So even though I wasn't ready to comment, I will. So, I think I made a slight comment through my questions earlier when I pointed out that I expect our staff to go for an assessment and recommendation that tries to achieve the most ultimate benefit. Especially when it needs to be a recommendation around safety. I think their recommendation should be as conservative as possible. We expect of them. We expect the same from all our staff, to be the very same, to outline all risks, all benefits, to outline the most severe risks or cautious approach where we need to be, especially when safety is a consideration. So what's being recommended is not outside of what should be expected from our staff. But where I do see a divide, and I said this earlier, is we've seen through anecdotal and when looking at the data as well, we have information, a pilot done by the Region of Waterloo where there was a variable time limit for enforcement. And that data, I think, outlines that safety can be ensured, speeds can be reduced by ensuring that the variable speed times are related towards the school timing, between a little bit before school start, a little bit after school starts, where the bulk of the traffic to the school would be. I understand and appreciate staff's comment that these schools may operate as a community hub before or after school hours. I wish that was a reality. I really do. The fact that we have these resources in the community, we have these gymnasiums that are built through tax-funded resources, the fact that we have these playgrounds that are well-maintained, green spaces, that they truly, in fact, were community hubs. They don't seem to be. As much as, you know, we would want these available spaces, I think they have a limited use compared to many of our other community hubs. I'm happy to hear that we do have other measures within our disposal. We have the hotspot program, we have the Zero Vision program, we have more quicker responsiveness through the fast speeding of enforcement measures like medium delineators or narrowing. So we can use all of those in conjunction to make sure that we're not being punitive to drivers that are driving in their natural format in a roadway outside of school hours. We would hold people to follow the laws of the land, the guidelines of what the specified speed limits are, but people vary by a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, it's one thing where speed is limited and there's a small variable in speed. It's another where there's a camera and someone captures you because you're driving maybe just a couple kilometers above the posted speed limit. And again, someone driving well past the normal school hours may not be necessarily cautious in that mindset that they're following exactly that 30 kilometers an hour, especially where they're coming from neighborhood streets that are 40 kilometers an hour. I may not have had the necessary concern that I'm outlining, and members of council have outlined as well, if it was a consistent speed, 40 kilometers throughout. So again, they should be driving around that speed limit anyways. But there's a sudden drop from the 40 to 30 in those internal neighborhoods. So we would be punitive in capturing people where there's the, you know, that sudden drop in outside of school hours at nighttime or during the summer. And I don't think that's necessarily forcing people to be more safer. I think that's causing unnecessary aggravation to people. So there is that happy medium in between. And the happy medium is expressed through Councillor Schneider's motion, that we are mindful that we want utmost safety for our students. 7 a.m. is well before school time, and 5 p.m. is well after school time. And I think it meets the intent of this council to bring increased safety on our roadways and especially around school zones. So I would be supporting the staff recommendation with the amendment as outlined by Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for bringing this report. You know, for the time I've been here, it's amazing how well versed you guys are in your whole department in community safety, and I'm thankful we got you folks that honestly at the helm of this to make our streets safer. So as Councillor Singh said, I am supportive of the motion, but I am also in support of the amendment provided by Councillor Schneider. I often say make it make sense to me, and have somebody getting a ticket at 4 o'clock in the morning on July 1st coming home doesn't make sense. If we're looking at safety for our students, there are no students in those areas they shouldn't be at 4 o'clock in the morning on July 1st. And so thank you, Councillor Schneider and Councillor Singh, for working on this motion, because I think for our community, this will make sense. Again, it doesn't make sense to have it when students are not in those areas of a school. So thanks again to staff for bringing the report, and to my fellow councillors for bringing the amendment forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. I want to thank staff for this report as well, and I want to say first and foremost, with all due respect to Councillor Schneider and Councillor Singh, I won't support this motion. I have been steadfast in my belief that driving is habit forming, and you get into the habit of driving down a road 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers, and I don't. I think that this is deviating off of this motion. I also believe that a school is a community place. It doesn't start at 9 and end at 5. There's kids going across streets at school grounds all the time. So I think that's a little misleading. So I'm sorry, I won't support this, and I think we should leave it as what staff's report is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I'm prepared to support staff's recommendation, and with that as well, support. I'm glad to see this here. I'm willing to support the amendment as well. And the reason why I'm making that decision is, again, one, I feel in the past, when dealing with our other municipal partners, in particular the region, we've had other members that would follow up with us and discuss the same issues that we're dealing with. And quite frankly, I've received absolutely no response from any other municipal official with regards to this. In fact, we would be invited into committees and everything else when we have these types of decisions, and to me it's rather disheartening to see that this is where it's been. In fact, that I brought this forward 6 months ago, and when even back then I even said we need to be working with the region, and in fact I feel like the region's working against us on this one, because again, they have not consulted us. They may have consulted with staff, but they did not consult with us at the ones who deal with it at the resident level. Those are the big concerns that I have. The other concern that I have is when I hear that the technology is not perfected, that we can't tweak it, I'm not sure why we're ready to roll it out all over everywhere when it's not ready to be, can be tailored to our specific needs or a Kitchener way. That concerns me. The other thing that concerns me is that the data. I haven't seen anything that says children are endangered as much more than significantly in after hours. I've not seen any data. I've not seen any data to prove otherwise. In fact, I think the data will show that there isn't really an issue. And so I feel like we're over-policing, being too aggressive. And again, when we approved Vision Zero, I didn't approve Vision Zero to be the almighty and everything else you know, it sounds like that statement that we're making is to basically to have zero. It's great to have zero, you know, deaths or zero and everything, but we got to remember there's a thing called reality. And sometimes we have to follow the reality, and I didn't make that decision because you know, that's a goal, yes, but that's not a reality. We got to be serious about that, and I hate to be critical about that, because if that's going to be thrown in the argument every single time that we have a concern, I'm going to have an issue with that. And anyways, I have really big concerns with the technology overall being thrown out everywhere, and I think we just have to realize that if the goal is to eliminate cars completely, then let's just say it and call it what it is, because that's where I see it, where it's going.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. So I support the direction that staff is going on this, and I just want to tell a little story. I was in Port Credit over the weekend, and right in the area that I was in, the speed limit was reduced to 30. And I was warned, go slow in that area, you'll get ticketed. And this was on a Saturday. And everybody was respecting the speed limit. And it was very nice to see, because there were shopping malls, there were schools, all in this one little area. And I'm sorry to hear that in some of the communities, your schoolyards aren't used as community space, because in the downtown core, they are. We've got ice rinks, we've got playgrounds, we've got basketball courts, and people use them all the time, right? Not to mention people walking their dogs, which often the dog goes with the kid with the parent. So I think that yes, these are community spaces. The only thing I would ask to Councillor Schneider, would you consider changing the timeline from 7 to 9 p.m. Monday to Monday, I guess. Because I think weekends are important to have that reduced speed limit as well. But I can see, you know, after 9 o'clock at night, maybe even after 8 o'clock at night, any day of the week, weekend, we could relax on that, but that otherwise it should be the 30 kilometers an hour.
Councillor Schneider.
I'm not open to that, only because of the pilot project and that people already are familiar with this.
Okay, thank you. Both Mayor Verbanovic and Councillor Davey had their hands up at the same time. Let's go with Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to echo some of the comments of my peers. I think it's important to note, too, that I think there's really only 2 speed cameras in any of our 10 wards. So I would caution you to listen to the experiences of Councillor Ioannidis and Councillor Schneider, because they've actually lived the experience of what the impacts are. I'm also disappointed in the data we have in general. I personally believe there is a world of difference between a 40 kilometer an hour limit with a camera and one without. And I think we really need that data to understand what the appropriate speeds should be, because as important as the safety is, we don't have the data showing how many, what problem we're actually solving. We need to see some of that. I'm going to support the amendment, but I'm a little bit concerned from what I heard from staff. It sounds like we may not be able to implement it if we don't have that that freedom to change the hours outside as well. So again, with that, I mean, we've got a week or so to look at this and try and tweak it and get some answers back from staff. But I think honestly, 9 p.m. on a Saturday in July, I really think you're just being punitive, right? And I get people saying that that's a tax grab and perhaps not appropriate. So I think we really need to look at this more closely, and also be consistent with the region, 40 kilometers an hour in every zone.
Thank you, Councillor. And we'll move to the Mayor.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Johnson. And I will, I think there are, first of all, a couple pieces of information that I'm still looking for. One is the ability to have it signed, but simply have it signed with the reduced speeds, but not actually enforce, versus the notion of signing it with different times, which I think is what this amendment is proposing, and making the enforcement adjustment. And I say that partially because that's in fact what happens in the real world. None of us know when Waterloo Regional Police Service sets up at Ottawa and Drager, for example, until everyone knows that it was, commonly referred to as at least it has been in the past, as a fishing hole, and Waterloo Regional Police are there because people regularly speed there, and so you don't know when they're there, and presumably you should be driving the 50 that's on that stretch of road. Secondly, we also know that typically police officers use some judgment in terms of issuing tickets. And it seems that at least the thresholds, as they've been reported by the public in social media, used by the region, are different than the thresholds that are commonly used by Waterloo Regional Police in terms of that judgment. And that's a concern for me. And so both of those areas are concerns, because fundamentally, what needs to be remembered is anytime we implement bylaws, legislation, and so on, it needs to earn the respect of the public. And one only needs to look at what happened with speed radar, photo radar on the 401 and so on, when it didn't earn the respect of the public, and that becomes a problem and a concern. I don't believe that 24/7 enforcement is the right thing. I also don't think that we need to be advertising the specific times by changing signage to reflect that. The other concern that I do have is I think we made the right decision in the first place with the 40 and 30 difference. I drive by Franklin, I would say probably at least half a dozen, if not a dozen times a week. And I fundamentally think that, that is a road with a school, and it's narrow, that should not become a consistent 40-kilometer-an-hour road. But I also don't think that somebody should be getting a ticket at midnight or on Christmas Day, as an example. And so I do think that that we need to get some more information. And so I can't support the amendment or the staff recommendation as it exists before us right now. And if it doesn't succeed, I would be asking that we go back to the 40 and 30 proposal, and then look at what we can do from an enforcement point of view without changing signage. If that is not possible, if the region is telling us that can't be done, then I could potentially look at this signage, because I think it makes that is the lesser of the two options. But that's where I sit today. I look forward to the additional information from staff at council when it comes back in a week's time. And and we will go from there. The last point I want to make is just in relation to Vision Zero. I think this council was very insightful when we adopted Vision Zero, because quite frankly, one death is one death too many. And ideally, we want to get to a world where there are zero traffic-related fatalities in our community. Are we, do I foresee that that's going to happen anytime soon? No, but I think it's a laudable and a responsible goal for us to have. It's one that is consistent with many other urban centers around the world. And, I don't think that we should be knocking that as a vision and in relation to this issue. While they are related, they're also two very different points and principles in many ways. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me to speak. I think there's a need for clarity around the intention here, because I've heard council members characterize the motion and the alternate motion in different ways. My understanding from Councillor Singh's opening comments was that this was not in replacement for the recommendation in the staff report, but it would complement it. I heard him say that that there would be support for the 40 and 30 as outlined by staff, with targeted enforcement essentially during school hours. I believe council members have characterized it differently, and so I think it's important, Madam Chair, that you have clarity on whether these motions are alternatives to each other or that they complement each other. The other thing I would offer is that staff had not seen the new motion before the meeting. Certainly, if council's intention is to target enforcement during operating hours, there may even be stronger language that could be adopted by council to influence decision-making around that. And so staff would be happy to follow up with a mover after the meeting to see if between now and council there's the ability to even tighten up further what council's intent may be. But I think it's important, Madam Chair, to clarify for today that the intention is that both motions could proceed and complement each other rather than compete with each other.
Okay, Mr. Chapman, sorry, if you can just clarify that. You're saying that I should ask council if they're clear on whether or not these two complement each other, or do we wait and, because we haven't had time to see it, until next week? Sorry.
My understanding from the mayor's comments was that he understood the new motion as basically having time-limited speed limits. What I understood from Councillor Singh, and I believe from Councillor Schneider, is that there was support for static speed limits as recommended by staff, but with targeted enforcement during school hours, so that the staff recommendation could proceed along with the recommendation brought forward by Councillor Schneider.
Councillor Singh?
Yeah, thank you for always being the Councillor Singh whisperer, Mr. Chapman, so you got it perfectly. That was my understanding as well, the way it was written. It didn't specify anything as to the speed. It was more about the variable speed enforcement. And so as to the speed posted on either the interior roadways and major collector roadways are specified through the staff report. That would be my understanding. And I think confirmation from Councillor Schneider is the same.
Yes, that is exactly it. It's the recommendations in the staff report, but with the time restrictions. Yeah, as prescribed by staff. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Michel.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be clear. So, can we put that amendment back up? Oh, you're changing it. Okay, sorry. So the speed limit isn't changing. Just if I could read it, it'd be better.
So, yeah, Councillor Michaud, so the staff recommendation from today would be in place with the amendment that Councillor Schneider has put forward with the time limits in place. But we do have to vote on each of them separately, so we'll vote on the...
No, sorry, I just want clarification. So the time limits in place is enforcement, not speed. Is that... It's the enforcement times. So the speed's always 30 or 40.
What staff has recommended in their
Yes.
report for speeds,
Yes.
I'm perfectly fine with. It's, the amendment is for the times
Okay.
of enforcement,
Of
for
the
ticketing.
Of ASC. Yeah, automated speed. That's
Yeah.
what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Okay, then I will support that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask my questions of staff now. So I want to be clear with, sorry? The mayor?
You can ask your questions as you already asked them.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask my questions. I haven't done that yet. Thank you. So in terms of the amendment that Councillor Schneider has put in place, what would this mean for signage?
So through the chair, in the middle of the meeting, I was able to reach out to my regional counterparts, and what I did find out is that the motion doesn't have to necessarily mean anything for signage specifically. We can work with the region, and there is the ability to modify hours of operation for ASE, and so what we can do is take a motion that recommends that we work with the region, very similar to what's on the screen, in terms of limiting when ASE is in place, and we'd go from there. The challenge that you would run into with actually signing signed time of day restrictions, it essentially makes ASE unusable in those locations. When there is specific time of day restrictions, ASE cannot be in use.
Okay, thank you. And just going back to something that you had mentioned before, Mr. Cronkite, around the timing and whether or not it would, mean that certain tickets people would be able to argue them as opposed to whenever we don't have timing on there. Can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, through the chair, and so again, that's why I reached out to my regional counterparts, because they're more familiar with ASE operation than we are. And so what was, to the comment earlier about, essentially a clock being set differently. So ASE is set to a certain clock. You could argue that the clock on your dash is the one that you were going by. So rather than getting a ticket at 5:59 through ASE, you're saying it was 6:04. It can go to the court system, and you can appeal a ticket, and you could make that argument. And so that puts a undue strain on the courts. What we're talking about in terms of the way that we're talking about it here, with working with our regional counterparts to use time restrictions on the back end, would eliminate that concern. And so if you received a ticket at 5:59 and your clock's at 6:04, the static speed limit on the street would dictate. So there's a little bit of grace period there when you're talking about ASE and the way that you can use it, and that's primarily why the provincial guidance states that you can't use ASE in time-limited signed streets, because there is a little bit of that confusion, and it's not meant to be used in that scenario.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to make a couple of comments on this. I am in favor of the staff recommendation, but I do have concerns about putting the timing piece in place, because I live behind a school, and there are kids playing. I love it. In the summertime, I hear kids playing basketball there at all hours of the night. In the wintertime, there's families over there using the toboggan hill at night, etc. And this is a place where kids will go over, maybe with an older sibling, etc. And they're going to go and play in our playgrounds, and that's exactly where we want them. I know that our extended daycare programs for the Waterloo Region District School Board, for example, those extended programs are open till 6 p.m. at night, and in some cases they're open till 7 p.m. at night, and they start as early as 6 a.m. in the morning. So I do have concerns with this, and I appreciate the spirit of the motion, but what we're trying to do here is to have people drive consistently safely around our schools, and this was the spirit of what we had done. And I don't view it as a cash grab. I view it as a community safety thing that we're trying to have people do. And I know that whenever I do something consistently, it trains my brain that this is what I'm supposed to do at these places at a certain time. Just like you know, how we drive from place to place, we do it, you know, consistently. And then that's what I want people to be thinking of in terms of our schools. I do support the staff recommendation and the changes that you would put forward, so I would be supporting that, but I would not be supporting the amendment at this time. Thank you. Oh, and Mayor Verbanovic.
Thanks, thanks, Chair Johnson. And so I just want to clarify with Mr. Cronkite. So are you saying with the amendment about the times of day, we can do that without necessarily putting signage up? You can simply do it from an operational point of view?
Through the chair to the mayor, yes, that's correct. It can be done through an operational point of view. I would put in the caveat, though, to the last bullet that I see on the screen, is that the municipality isn't the decision-making authority here. The region of Waterloo is, and so we may want to modify the motion so that it states that transportation staff work with the region of Waterloo to restrict the time of day use of AAC and leave it a little bit more general so that we can address some of the concerns that we've heard here in terms of 4 p.m. versus 5 p.m. versus 7 p.m. and come up with something that makes sense.
Okay, so is that something you can do between now and council next week?
Through the chair, yes. We'll make a connection with regional staff this week and get a sense of the direction in terms of being able to restrict time of use.
Okay, and so, Madam Chair, I'm actually a little reluctant to do this, but I think in light of the way the conversation's gone and some of the explanation of things, I actually would like to move an amendment on a further amendment on the issue of major community collector and city arterials, and that we actually put that in school zones down to 30, and that we deal with it through simply the hours of enforcement. And I'm moving that, quite frankly, because I do not agree with staff's position on this around different types of community roadways. We heard loud and clear from staff that the survivability in a 30 in a school zone goes up to 90% as opposed to 70%. And in my mind, that is a significant enough number. Yes, maybe not the same as when we go from 50 to 40, which is 15 to 70%. But if I were to have children, I think it's a significant enough number that during school times, and again, I'm supportive of putting times in place, but I do think that in the school zone, it should be 30 from a safety point of view. And so that would be my amendment if there is a seconder for it.
Second for the amendment. You don't need a second.
Okay, thank you.
You don't need a second for this.
No. Councillor Michaud.
Sorry, yeah, I feel like I'm really flip-flopping here today. I apologize, but the conversation is just going in circles. I agree with Mayor Verbanovic with the 30 kilometers right across. I think that offers the continuity of speed that we are looking for, and the habit forming. So you're not in different school zones. You're going 40 here, 30 there, and we know that 40 goes to 50 in a second, right? So it's not. I think the 30 kilometers right across the board is a good idea. I'm still not convinced with the speed enforcement time zones, but I guess I would wait until to see if we can get some feedback from solid feedback from the region with how they can work with this. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis?
Yeah, can I ask, I think that's not an amendment. I think the 40's the first part of the amendment. This is an addition, so I don't know why the 40 is crossed out.
Because he's changing it.
No, this is not what we agreed to. This is...
Mr. Mayor?
Well, the point is that I'm moving an amendment to go to 30 on major community collector and city arterial roads as well. And not, so in other words, maintaining the speeds that we have now, but putting in time of day changes.
Okay, so, and then I'll put forward an amendment for it to be 40, to go back to 40. And then also, I also have another amendment that if the region fails to be able to smooth the time zones, it should go back to 40 kilometers, just to be consistent with the rest of the region.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I would like to ask staff with what Mayor Vrbanovic is proposing with the 30 limit on arterial roads. It's my understanding right now that the addressing of the school is the determining factor of the school zone. So, for example, Chicopee Hills Public School is at the corner of Fairway and Lackner, but addressed as Chicopee Hills Lane. So you cannot put a school zone on either Lackner or Fairway. And that is an issue that I would love to see cleared up. So the other thing too is when you're discussing anything with the region, I would like our city councilors to be part of that discussion, because we are the ones that get the phone calls and the emails about the issues in the school zones.
So through the council to the chair, it's not actually the address, it's actual school frontage. And so the challenge with Chicopee Hills is that it doesn't actually have school frontage on Lackner and Fairway because of the way that site has been created. There's that internal road loop, and so the school is actually fronted on that internal road, and so the region doesn't consider Lackner or Fairway as frontage at all. But in terms of the Highway Traffic Act, it's actually, as long as there's school frontage on a street, then it can be classified as a school zone.
See, but this is the absolute absurdity of that rule, because the students have to use Fairway and Lackner to get to the school. So irregardless of where it's facing or where it's addressed, the speed limits on those major arterial roads should be safe, and they're not. And the region is not addressing this, and it's frustrating. So this needs to be discussed. I would like to meet with the regional staff. I'm sure other councillors would too. They don't hear about it. Regional councillors don't hear about these issues. They're not the ones dealing with the school, safety councils, and student transportation services. We are. So we need to be in on those conversations.
So through the chair to the councillor, we can absolutely take this offline and connect with regional staff in terms of having that additional conversation about Chicopee Hills. I can tell you, and going back to the earlier comment about community safety zones, I can tell you that Chicopee Hills is an excellent example of why we would use community safety zones to make an area safer.
Right, and there's a proposed school at 20 Woolner Trail that won't be facing Fairway Road. So this needs to be figured out now.
Okay, I'm going to...
Madam Chair, point of order, or point of... I'm wondering we should actually be deferring this, moving a motion of deferral. There's a lot of unanswered questions that I think before we start making, potential decisions, it would be helpful that we actually get clarity, that the motion has clarity. We heard from staff that it would be helpful to have that happen as well. And so I move that we refer this to council next Monday.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was actually just going to call for a 5-minute recess to sort this out. So let's vote on the deferral. Then, Councillor Singh, you want to speak to the deferral?
Yeah, I'm not so sure there is really uncertainty or lack of understanding. I think it's fairly clear. There's a staff recommendation that outlines consistent enforcement through cameras in school zones, 40 on major collector roadways, and 30 on interior neighborhoods. Councillor Schneider has put forward a motion that places an amendment regarding variable speed enforcement on all those zones, irrespective of 40 or 30. And now Mayor Rabinovich, separately, although I don't agree with it, is putting forward an additional change to the staff recommendation, stating that it should be static 30 across the board and not a difference between 40 and 30 depending on the volume of traffic on a particular roadway. There's full clarity on that. Staff have said that they've got confirmation from regional staff that they can actually do variable enforcement. So there's certainty on that as well. So I don't know if it's really necessary. We just need to take a motion, take a vote on the amendment that Mayor Rabinovich has put forward. If that fails, it would be Councillor Schneider's. Again, if that succeeds, then it would be the amended motion. If it fails, then we would be voting on the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Clerk, when there's a deferral motion on the table, do we not deal with that first?
The deferral motion would take precedence.
Yes.
That is correct.
Thank you. Okay.
But I was commenting we don't need to defer. That's my problem.
It was already moved, Councillor Singh, right? The mayor moved the deferral.
And we can take comment that we don't want to support, but anyway, that's fine. Let's move it over.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not. Do you have a question for me, or? Like I moved deferral. I'm not sure that. Are you looking for some additional comment from me? The
No,
timing
you
is
had
next
already-
Monday
you had already had your
at
hand
council,
up,
which
so-
is when this would come back anyway.
Okay, thank you. So we'll vote on the deferral, please. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. I'm going to call a 5-minute recess before we move on to the next item. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we will call the meeting back to order. We do have the mayor and Councillor Davey virtually, so we do have quorum. So we're now moving to our rental housing eviction and displacement study, and staff have a presentation for us.
Good afternoon, Chair Schneider and members of committee. Staff are here today to provide an update to the committee on the city's ongoing rental housing eviction and displacement study. Also here today is Chris from Parcel Economics, who conducted a financial feasibility analysis as part of this work. I would just like to take a quick moment to acknowledge the efforts of Richard Kelly-Ritz in the material that Mr. Stevenson and I are presenting to you today. Mr. Kelly-Ritz's last day with the city was on Friday. The report in front of you today provides an update on where staff are in learning about municipal tools for rental housing, eviction, and displacement. I will provide a brief introduction to this work, and then Chris will share the financial feasibility analysis of a rental replacement bylaw. Throughout this year, staff have been providing updates to committee and council has been making decisions on a number of housing-related studies. The rental housing eviction and displacement study is one of many housing studies that has been or is in the process of being completed by the city. Earlier this year, Council passed its municipal housing pledge, and in early 2024, Council will have the opportunity to make a decision on inclusionary zoning and an updated land use and zoning framework for Kitchener's major transit station areas. The staff report and presentation today are an important starting point of conversations with Council and continued conversations with the community and stakeholders regarding tools available at the municipal level to support existing tenants. Staff continues to build an understanding of the complexities of eviction and displacement. Throughout 2023, staff have continued to engage with the community and government partners on matters related to rental housing, including discussions with the Region of Waterloo, the Waterloo Region Social Development Centre, and Kitchener's Lived Expertise Working Group. Under the current provincial legislative framework, the only legislative tool at the area municipal level to directly regulate evictions is through a rental replacement bylaw passed under the Municipal Act. A rental replacement bylaw can be applied to address the loss of 6 or more rental units. There are currently 3 municipalities in Ontario which are known to have enacted a rental replacement bylaw: Toronto in 2006, Mississauga in 2018, and Oakville earlier this year. Since Toronto's bylaw has been in effect, approximately 5,000 units have been replaced through this tool. Since 2017, in the City of Kitchener, there have been 47 notices filed with the Landlord and Tenant Board for evictions due to demolitions and renovations. 9 of these notices were for demolitions, and only 2 of them were where a rental replacement bylaw could have applied. A rental replacement bylaw cannot be used where there are evictions through renovations, nor can it be used where there are evictions due to demolitions for buildings with less than 6 rental units. I'll now turn the presentation over to Chris.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of Council. My name is Chris White. I'm a principal at Parcel. We're a land economics firm based in Toronto. We've been tasked, as you just heard, with preparing a more targeted, kind of focused analysis on financial feasibility and the potential impacts thereof associated with the rental replacement bylaw. If you recall, our firm was also involved in the enabling missing middle and affordable housing work that was done and presented to Council earlier this year, and the reason I mention that is that we were able to leverage a lot of the underlying kind of core financial analysis structure, and maybe more importantly, working with a planning and architecture firm at that time, some of the prototypical development concepts that were identified, so we've tried to ensure some continuity through this work as well. So for those who maybe aren't familiar with that, or just as a quick refresher, just in terms of the underlying structure of the analysis, we looked at 2 different distinct geographies, the central neighborhoods and suburban neighborhoods, namely just to tie into the development charge background bylaw rates, so that we were kind of appropriately capturing those municipal fee structures across different locations within the community. And also really important to note at the outset that when we're talking about this broader rental housing universe, as they call it, there's kind of two main sub-segments, one being the primary rental market, so buildings that were developed with the primary intention of being purpose-built rental units, and then the secondary market, which is more ownership condominium-based, which are subsequently rented out to tenants. So in the context of rental replacement bylaw, we're talking the primary rental market, but it is important to capture all the above in terms of at least setting that context. Similarly, as I mentioned, we were able to rely on some previous typologies that were used, whereas our previous work spanned the kind of tall to small spectrum, as we like to call it, from single-family homes all the way up to high-density residential condominium and rental projects. We decided to narrow in specifically on these kind of three typologies, being a mid-rise, around 6 stories, bumping up to about a 20-story high-rise apartment typology, and then ultimately up to what you'd typically find exclusively in the core and in the kind of central neighborhoods of 45-story high-rise apartment. And the reason we focus in on these is that these were identified as being the most likely to replace existing rental units, sufficient scale and density to kind of counteract and accommodate that type of replacement policy. So jumping straight into the kind of core observations from our work, we were tasked with responding to kind of 2 main research questions, if you will. The first being, will a new rental replacement bylaw provide any risk in terms of materially impacting residential development in the community? In short, in a nutshell, yes, it certainly will. We've seen a lot of challenge to feasibility lately in terms of increased construction cost, interest rates rising, and so on. And this would ultimately just be yet another layer that would kind of deter some level of intensification. While there were certain areas that were capable of supporting and accommodating some replacement, again, keying in on that high-rise condominium ownership scenario as kind of a default or maybe an obvious observation, investment and development community tends to take the path of lethal resistance, so such that there are easier wins available, perhaps on other sites that aren't subject to a rental replacement policy. Our observation is that that would certainly be the kind of outcome, whether intended or otherwise. And then secondly, the kind of second part of our research was, if the city does decide to go through in advancing this type of bylaw, what are the optimal or ideal parameters to do so? So in light of that feasibility characteristic and providing a little bit of challenge to advancing new developments to market, we've recommended that, in a nutshell, again, remove as many barriers as possible. And that will at least provide some backstop or opportunity to not sterilize existing rental sites from seeing any new reinvestment or redevelopment, which can provide new housing supply. So to that end, just a few kind of key takeaways here. One being, keep it simple. The earlier and the easier that the development community can introduce these new parameters into their own underwriting process and kind of seeing if projects pencil out, the better. Similarly, maintain some consistency. There's only a handful, as you just heard, of Ontario municipalities that advanced kind of full force and effect similar bylaws, but we've generally recommended setting similar parameters. We're also big fans, similar to other housing policy, of kind of phasing implementation, a bit of a double-edged sword. There are benefits to kind of just jumping right in, as well as phasing implementation, but at least not preempting any active development projects that are going to market. And then providing some opportunities for flexibility. You'll see a little bit of nuance within the existing bylaws in Toronto, Oakville, and Mississauga, but it is common convention to have at least some form of off-site delivery and or cash in lieu alternative to redelivering the replaced units on the actual development site. And then just quickly on a kind of 1,000-foot view, some other things just to keep in mind back of everyone's heads as they go forward with this. One is just understand the likely side effects, whether they're intended or not. This could have kind of indirect impacts insofar as that could result in increased density, could result in increased pricing for the non-replaced units to compensate, and maybe redirecting development activity to areas where the city isn't intending. And then finally, just to really have an appreciation for how this slots in the broader housing spectrum. So this in and of itself is not capable of yielding a net increase in new rental supply, but rather focusing on kind of existing. It's also not like heritage preservation where you're maintaining that exact physical space or unit, but rather the opportunity for tenants to occupy a space. And in general, not an ideal tool for addressing deeply affordable units. And all over the city, we have some numbers to speak to it if it's helpful, but about 1/5, 1 in every 5 of the total rental supply as it exists today is really likely to be captured within this type of bylaw, if at all, just to, again, set that context. So housing crisis as it exists today, pretty multifaceted as we've spoken to in the past. So this is just one of many tools available to kind of alleviating or addressing some of the needs associated with that. Thank you for your time. With that, I'll hand it back to staff.
So the staff report contains 3 options for a rental replacement bylaw, and staff is recommending that Council proceed with option 3, which is to enact a rental replacement bylaw as outlined by the Parcel team with 2 exceptions. Staff is recommending no phase-in of the bylaw, and also to not provide a cash in lieu as an option. Staff are recommending option 3 as it maximizes the protection of existing tenants using the only tool currently available under the Municipal Act. The staff do not currently have the administrative capacity to manage a cash in lieu system. The phasing in of a bylaw requirements could result in additional tenant displacement at a time where housing affordability is already challenged. At this time, staff expect to report back to Council with a rental replacement bylaw pending Council's authorization to do so in late Q1 2024. In addition to preparing a rental replacement bylaw, staff will continue to work with the community, stakeholders, and other orders of government on shared solutions related to housing, eviction, and displacement. And that concludes our presentation, and staff and the consultant team are available for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you. Before we hear questions of staff, we'd like to hear from our delegations, and we have a few in person. First will be Acer Bonaparte. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Today I would like to speak to you as the elected chair of Waterloo Region Acorn on the rental housing eviction and displacement study presented by staff today. Waterloo Region Acorn is a community union formed in the region in late September of this year. We are growing fast and have over 500 members in the region with over 150,000 nationwide. We are comprised of low to moderate income families working on issues of social and economic justice. Like any union or association, our membership decides the drives of the organization while determining that the vast majority of our resources go towards organizing door-to-door, block-to-block, and city-to-city. We commend the city for taking the time to explore the potential for a rental replacement bylaw in Kitchener. Rental replacement bylaws are effective tools for protecting affordable housing stock and preventing tenant displacement. They also act as a strong disincentive for developers to dem-evict tenants. The housing that is at the greatest risk for dem-eviction is purpose-built rentals where vacancy rates have remained very low. Purpose-built rentals play a vital role in providing housing, especially to low to moderate income tenants. However, most of these purpose-built rental housing stock in Ontario was built during the 60s and 70s, more than 50 years ago. Therefore, it is extremely important to save the existing affordable rental housing we already have. If we implement a rental replacement bylaw in Kitchener, there will be huge potential to save more affordable housing from getting demolished, while at the same time adding to the affordable units in the city. Currently, Waterloo Region Acorn is organizing tenants in 2 different properties facing demolition for development, one in which our elected secretary Meg Rutten lives, and one property on Benton Street, which is not far from where we're standing today. Tenants are terrified. They don't know where they will go. They are scared they won't be able to find an affordable place, and they are being left behind. The compensation landlords must provide for tenants when dem-evicting a building is not enough to cover first and last month's rent at the current market prices, let alone the years of higher rent the tenant will be paying for the future. A rental replacement bylaw in Kitchener would protect these tenants, ensuring they're able to have continue having a place to live and maintain their quality of life. It would help curtail our rising homeless population. We would continue to build housing while effectively eliminating the displacement of vulnerable tenants and increasing the number of affordable units in the city. Waterloo Region Acorn members are calling on committee members to support the creation of a rental replacement bylaw in Kitchener, and we have ideas that would include the following. Units should be replaced at a ratio of 1-to-1 or 25% of the units in the building, whichever is higher. That way, if you're replacing a 6-unit building with 100 units, you'd have 25 units of affordable housing instead of just 6. The replacement unit should also be at the same location so as to ensure that the tenants are not disconnected from their community. Existing tenants should be offered the right of first refusal to the new units at the same rent and number of bedrooms as their previous units. Tenants' relocation assistance should be provided in the case of dem evictions. It can take years for redevelopment to be complete. This is why Acorn would also like to see the city adopt a policy similar to Burnaby BC's policy, which requires developers to find tenants temporary accommodation or top up their rent to CMHC average market rent for the area plus 30%. And tenants should be provided support for moving costs. We've seen success with these bylaws in cities like Toronto and Mississauga, and even more successes in places like Burnaby. As per Melissa Goldstein's submission on Bill 23, in 2022, the City of Toronto contributed $78.5 million in capital funds and foregone revenues from waived fees, development charges, and property taxes to create 919 new affordable rental units. This is about the same number of affordable and mid-range rental units Toronto's rental replacement bylaw policies also replaced in 2022 at no cost to the taxpayer. Acorn urges councillors to take the next steps to introduce a rental replacement bylaw in Kitchener. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. We have some questions. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chairperson. And thank you for coming in, and really like the perspective that your organization brings. I guess one of the questions is, who do you expect to pay for the displacement? Like, in the sense, do you feel like the municipality should chip in paying for these replacements, or do you feel like the private sector should be chipping in to pay for these replacement units?
I believe a good solution would be for the municipality to chip in if they're able, but the main burden should rest on the developers.
Okay. And just out of clarification, do you feel the municipality should be playing a bigger role in the housing sector with regards to affordable housing, or should we be more advocating towards the level of government that does provide the funding?
Yeah, I think it should be a collaboration between the two. We definitely need to get government back involved in housing, because currently, with it being at the whim of the private sector, they have just been taking advantage of the system.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming in and for the work that you do. So in the report that we received, there was, one of the concerns was the fact that if we introduce a rental replacement bylaw, that it will have an impact on intensification. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I definitely believe that we do need to build more housing, and it is more important to have more housing stock than to worry about the neighborhoods they're being built in and how it would fit into the character of the neighborhood, because we are at a crisis point, and we do have a rising homeless population.
So, but if, according to the report, if we introduce this rental replacement bylaw, we'd have less intensification. So how do you balance the two?
Sorry, I need clarification on what intensification is.
The building of more and more condos or units and more housing at the expense of renovating or evicting people, displacing people to build those buildings.
Yeah, that's what the rental replacement bylaw would very much help with. It would ensure that the people have a place to go in the new units, and that's why we would like to see something similar to Burnaby BC's policy on providing temporary accommodation for the people, tenants.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, there's no further questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ryan Murdoch.
Hey, I'm Ryan. I lived in Kitchener now for a little over a year. I'm a member of Acorn. I was a member of Acorn in Toronto. So I want to reiterate a couple things Acer said, because, consistency, we've talked about that today, I think. Units should be replaced at a ratio of 1:1 or 25% of the total units in the building, again, as Acer said, because this way you actually, if you're going to displace people, you better make use of it and not do it for very little. The replacement unit should also be at the same location. One thing I think that, I don't know, like I'm a lifetime renter, always rented, have dealt with landlord issues in the past. Even if you can afford to move, even if you can pull that off, a lot of low, moderate income people, like you build connections in a neighborhood, right? You build support units, and every displacement removes people, rips some of the most vulnerable people out of those support units, right? So from my perspective, bylaws like this are the bare minimum of what we should be doing, because otherwise, honestly, like whether you want it or not, you're condemning people on ODSP, you're condemning people on old age, so the most vulnerable people, you're going to condemn a bunch of them to homelessness, and then you're going to complain about, encampments, or try to solve encampments, right? But, like, solving encampments starts way before people are living in a tent. So every time you displace people, even with some of these bylaws, right, people are going to fall through those cracks, and you're going to end up with some of that. So this, again, this bylaw, bare minimum, I think, of what is reasonable to expect from people who want to say they want to protect tenants. Offer tenants, existing tenants, the right of first refusal. And again, I really encourage all of you staff, if you haven't already, check out the tenant assistant policy from Burnaby. That's something Acorn has supported. Another thing I really encourage people to do, because this is 5 minutes and, it's often helpful to read through, take time, consideration. You can visit Acorn Canada, you can reach out to Acorn Canada. As Acer mentioned, we represent a ton of tenants, so if you want to consult with people, you can already, that's already there. Because also I know government loves to do a new study every time, and a new study, we talk about efficiency, we talk about cost. Every study is going to cost money, going to cost time. More homeless people. So, yeah. And it should be noted, like both my and Acorn's involvement in this process isn't necessarily that we then support some of these developments. Like I saw from the study that some of the thing might be developers pick easier targets. Yeah, go pick easier targets then. Like, don't develop where there's already affordable housing when there's other options. Build the new affordable housing, then maybe when people have new affordable housing in their community, you go back, right? That seems logical to me. And then you have more housing, and you haven't displaced a whole bunch of people and ripped them from their communities. So, yeah, you can also look to agree at Toronto in some of their studies, but also Toronto passes a lot of semi-weak legislation with lots of loopholes and everything, so I mean, be better than that, please. Toronto, I dealt with their council a few times, not super helpful, not super great. So yeah, what else did I want to say? I have a whole minute. And I'm not gonna lie, the way that, I know stuff happens, but this starting a half hour late, like as a working person who takes time off, and obviously that's not easy, right? Most working class people, you can't just necessarily take a day off. I know there's probably extenuating circumstances and stuff, but mildly frustrating. So just wanted to make that point. And yeah, anyways, bare minimum, please do it. And then please do more. And if developers complain, tell them to get better at capitalism because they claim to love it. And their CEOs and like the REITs, who are the most powerful landlords right now, right? Not mom and pop, not Joe down the street who's just renting out his basement. They're not the main landlords, right? Like you can just drive around, see Starlight, a whole bunch of other ones. Like they're fine. They're fine. They're going to make money. They always have. They always will. And also, we don't have to worry about encouraging housing stock, really, because it's always going to get built. It always has, right? They're going to want to make their money, and money isn't housing right now. So, thank you.
Oh, hold on, we have some questions for you.
Oh, yeah, okay, cool. Wow. Okay, sorry, I've been to other deputations and no one's ever asked. So.
That's okay, Ryan. That's okay. We have Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for coming in, and I do appreciate your perspective. I guess you're the second delegation that's brought up Burnaby, and I'm just wondering if Burnaby, the municipality, pays for this subsidy for these for their rental.
That is a great question, and I bet if we go to their website that I recommended, they'll be able to answer that. Because like honestly, like I'm a line cook. I work, I do stuff. So like some of the bare bones, right? Like honestly, that's what you guys and that's what staff does. I'm here to tell you sort of like how it's going to impact us, how it's going to impact people. You know what I mean? My personal thoughts are municipalities shouldn't pay for it. Who's making the money? Who's ever making the money? They pay for it. They want to make money, then pay some money.
Okay.
I don't know. That's fine to me. Anyways, that's my perspective.
Do you not feel that housing in general is the when we're looking at, you know, affordable housing in general, it's primarily the provincial jurisdiction, and then here locally it's the region's jurisdiction to some degree. Wouldn't it be more prudent for us to advocate to the other levels of government to be able to provide the funding appropriate to make sure that this does happen?
I mean, you should do this and do that.
Okay.
Right? Like, yeah, I agree. Provincial is very responsible, and Acorn pressures them, right? Tries to get to those. But yeah, I think that is also like, you guys should pressure the province. You should demand better from the province. The province doesn't do a very good job most of the time, right? Like, low key, like even the idea, like when they redevelop affordable housing, right? Like, why would they want to redevelop affordable housing? Because a lot of the affordable housing is because of rent control, but then the new building's going to be built after 2018, and it's not going to be rent controlled. So like, the developers should be like, right? Because they're demolishing a bunch of affordable housing, because even stuff that's not technically affordable, but that is rent controlled, is at least like maybe 35–40% of some people's income.
Okay.
So yeah, anyway, sorry.
Okay, thank you for that perspective. I will look at and see what Burnaby's doing, because whether or not the BC government is providing any assistance with that, because the reality is we can only tax so much and raise so much funds to support all the needs in our community, and we don't have those tools to be able to do all those things that we want to do.
Yeah, well, I can assure you that Acorn would be happy to work with like also pressuring the provincial government, because yeah, they don't do nearly enough, and I think we all know, you know, like our levels of government have left municipalities out to dry, right? Like devolve responsibility, take away tax, whatever. Like that's.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you for coming in, Ryan, and presenting. Can you just elaborate a little bit on your experience, the experiences you've had in Toronto, and how the bylaw came to be? Maybe it predated you, but just how it's been applied, and do you feel, like you said, that it doesn't go far enough? So what are some of the things that you think we might want to consider with our own bylaw here?
So I don't know if that's me sort of humming. I can deal with whatever, just for other people. Anyways, so yeah, so in Toronto, that did get passed before like I was organized or like really aware of anything. Like I was a renter during that time, but more focused just on paying rent, being employed in Toronto, right? And then I did have to, thankfully, like nothing ever did get developed that I was specifically in. But I can also say, just knowing that that's a possibility, like where I lived in Toronto, everything was getting developed. It was in the East End, sort of downtown. And like that's a pressure where when you have an affordable apartment, like, and you can tell when a block is not like owned by landlords who are basically waiting to cash out. And they kind of let everything go, and they just want a development to come in, buy the block, make money, and you're gone. So that's like even the externalities sort of the whole process is thankfully all I've ever had to experience personally. But then, especially through Acorn, I've come into contact with many people, right, who through development had to like move from like maybe downtown Toronto up to like Scarborough and stuff. And like that's like moving from like almost from here to Scarborough yourself, right? Like stuff like that. And then the thing about enforcement is that essentially, like, I don't find how, like, right, like, when your landlord basically steals from you by not repairing stuff and what, like, there's, like, low level, like, it's hard to get any enforcement. So I would say that part of that is, like, what the city wants to put into in terms of by law enforcement and where they want to put their resources into. It's like how, well, anyways, I have thoughts on policing too, but I don't think that's today. But yeah, right, like, it has to actually You have to have enforcement mechanisms and then hold the powerful developers and REITs and stuff accountable. Because if you don't, they're going to just do it, right? And if the fines are low, they'll do it because then it's just spent costs that are factored into like the profit rate.
Okay. Just one last question. You know, we hear about the homeless rates in Toronto, and they're pretty high, right? So how much of an impact? I mean, I think it was 5,000 units have been retained over the past 17 years. So clearly we're not getting things right.
No. Well, because it's like this is a small, like, and I think I want to emphasize that, like, right? Like this is it's good, this bylaw, but it is like the first step, right? Like this isn't comprehensive. I think we can all agree, right? Like I don't even think it covers renovictions, which are just a plague at this point on our society, like a literal plague, because when people end up homeless, their life expectancy drops a lot, right? So, yeah, I mean, I again, like, so this saves 5,000 right in Toronto, and like, again, that's under Toronto, so I think you guys could do better, like relative. Yeah, and then I think it's a small step, because this isn't going to end the problem. It's going to do like a tiny bit to mitigate the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions.
All right, thank you.
Our next delegation is Megan Walker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan Walker, and I work with the Social Development Center, specifically with the Eviction Prevention and Tenant Support Team. I'm speaking today in support of this bylaw, rental replacement bylaw. So I work on the front lines of the housing crisis every day. I support people who are facing displacement through no fault of their own, more often than not, because the landlord wants them out. And they are forced out into an unaffordable, deeply unaffordable housing market. These people were often already vulnerable. They come from shelters that have been placed by Lutherwood. They're elderly, they have disabilities. I can't remember the last time I just had somebody who was just being evicted that could actually move without an issue. We are losing units here faster than we are building them, during a housing crisis, no less. And we can't afford to lose any housing. Every unit of housing we lose during the housing crisis displaces someone and raises the market rent for everyone else. And specifically, I do tenant support because I'm an organizer as well. And I focus on large buildings with multiple units. So every week I get more than one case where the entire building is being evicted. Not just one person, entire buildings. Or they have bed bugs, but you know. So this is generally why I support staff's recommendation of a no phase-in for the bylaw. It needs to happen now. It needs to happen yesterday. We need to have new units built to match every unit that we lose. And no cash in lieu, because cash for keys is a common tactic from housing providers to force people out who are desperate and only see the money as the only option to move forward. This rental replacement bylaw means housing providers will remain responsible for housing that is being rebuilt. And you know, they should be doing that because they are supposed to be providing housing. They want us to call them housing providers, then provide more housing. Right now, the social infrastructure around tenancies and housing greatly benefits housing providers and landlords. We need more tenant protections, like this bylaw, to keep people housed and communities housed and whole, because whole communities are being displaced right now. And while I do think that we should be advocating toward the provincial government, I don't think anyone at this point is coming to save us there, so we have to advocate for ourselves from this room, from this community. Thank you.
Excuse me, one question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, hi Megan, and thank you for coming in. You say that entire buildings are being evicted.
Yes.
Is this for demolition and rebuild or for renovictions?
Both demoviction and renoviction. I got 2 last week. And often enough, they're being evicted in silos, so they'll evict one person, or they separate them, right? So they keep them separate. But sometimes even the tenants there don't realize there's the whole building that's being evicted. So it's a divide and conquer strategy, but it is the whole building.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming in.
Okay, and there are no further questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next is Sally Guns, and Sally, I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Could I just ask if Greg could go first? It would be more logical. Do you have Greg DeGroot Majetti?
Greg, that's okay. Yep. Greg DeGroot Majetti. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Greg DeGroot Majetti. I live in the Cedar Hills neighborhood. And let me first start by saying thank you, councillors, for directing staff to do the rental housing eviction and displacement study. And thank you. As part of the broader work that you're doing around the Housing for All strategy for those of us who live in Kitchener, it's very, very important work. I would like to speak in favor of the staff recommendation to create a rental replacement bylaw, and for that bylaw to cover all of the geographies in the city. To give I would be okay with giving the option for off-site units for folks, although I am sensitive to the concerns that have been raised by the other delegations related to that. And the recommendation that replacement units remain rental for at least 10 years or until the tenants move, whichever is longer, I would add. And I understand that in some of the other municipal rental replacement bylaws, they require even a longer period of time for rental units new units to remain rental. What I'd like to point out a little bit is something I think we're all aware of. I mean, Kitchener is in a real affordable housing and homelessness crisis. The latest Vital Signs report from the Waterloo Region Community Foundation documents, as they say, a huge loss of existing affordable housing through market conditions. And quoting again from that report, affordable units are disappearing far faster than new affordable units are being built. On average, Waterloo Region lost more than 2,100 affordable units per year between 2016 and 2021. So that would be units renting for less than $1,000 a month. That's a rate 4 times greater than the 500 new units that are being constructed annually by the region. That's a quote from the Vital Signs report. It's important to bear in mind that apartment buildings that were built before 2018 are covered by rent control. So people living in those apartments have some protection from the rapid rise in rents. But if those buildings are demolished and replaced by a new building, the new units are no longer covered by rent control. And we have seen tenants in some of the new buildings see their rent increased year to year far above the rent guidelines. Vital Signs report also points out, again quoting, that small housing units are adding to the housing crisis. The report notes that much of the new housing being constructed is smaller, generally 1 and 2 bedroom units. And when these new developments involve the demolition of existing townhouses and 3 bedroom units, it only makes the housing crisis worse. So the proposed rental replacement bylaw, which staff is recommending, can help mitigate these problems by requiring developers to include an equal number of units of the same size and rent as the units being demolished. And I would also echo the concerns to make sure that the bylaw provide right of refusal on the new units to existing tenants and to support them in finding alternative housing and covering the additional cost that might be during the construction of the new apartments. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have a question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, again, thank you for coming in, Greg. So in the staff report, they list 3 options. Which option are you supporting here?
Well, the one that the staff is recommending.
So option
3, yes.
Okay. And what do you see that it gives beyond what the others 2 are offering?
Well, the first option is to do nothing. And that, I think, is part of the problem that we're experiencing right now. And as staff explained, Option 3 will be simpler to implement right away and provide protection for residents. I mean, and just to give an example of why this is so important. So as I mentioned, I live in the Cedar Hill neighborhood, and one of the developments that actually the Acorn folks are working on is right in my neighborhood at 93 to 99 Benton Street and 39 to 43 St. George Street. Now, the residents and neighbors, we have reached out to the owners to try to talk about, first of all, understand why it was that they chose to put a development there rather than, say, on the property right next door that's vacant and for sale, or any number of other vacant properties right in our neighborhood that we would love to see developed. We've reached out to see if we could work for them to provide some assistance and support with, for the residents, and pursue perhaps creative options like partnering with a not-for-profit. We have talked to a couple not-for-profit housing providers who would be very interested in working on that project. And to this point, we really had no response. Our hope would be that a rental replacement bylaw would really force developers to either develop in areas that are vacant or make sure that they protect the rights of existing residents. Otherwise, we're just going to be creating more tent encampments, sadly, as we're seeing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there are no further questions that I see. Sally? Okay, great. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you very much. The reason I asked to go after Greg is that I also live in Cedar Hills, and I don't want to duplicate what he said. He's described the issues very well. And I think on behalf of many of in our community, if not all in our community, we support staff's recommendations, and in particular we would support option 3 as being the most practical and sensible of the options. I would, obviously, this is just the preliminary step in developing the bylaw. Clearly, there are issues that need to be addressed, in particular from our observation, what happens to people in the interim. Even if you have the bylaw, that becomes critical. I think, you know, speaking for a number of us in our community, the issue that we're facing right now with the Benton St. George Street project has been an incredible eye-opener, because we are observing, you know, we live a fairly sheltered life like probably all of you do, and we're watching real people, friends in our community facing this issue, and knowing that the result, given that the developer is unwilling to discuss this with the community and with the tenants, we know what the result is going to be for these people. We're looking at people who are potentially homeless, and we're talking about children, seniors, people on ODS, etc. So it's been a real eye-opener, and that is why we're particularly pleased that this bylaw is being proposed, and we thank staff very much for it. Clearly, we and many other people will be willing to work with them to ensure that the kind of loopholes that were referred to before do not occur here. I just want to throw in something entirely unrelated, with your permission. One of the things that is really obvious in our community is that we get sites with approval given for development, and then nothing happens, and in the interim you lose good low-cost housing. And I'll give you the example. If you drive up Madison on the top of the hill when you're looking down at Cameron Heights, there are 3 large houses there. I think development approval was provided in 2017. Those buildings are boarded up and have been since then, probably before then. And throughout our community, we are seeing these projects where there's absolute loss of housing and nothing happens. And that's the very worst outcome for everyone. So we're fully in support of this, obviously fully in support with additional protections provided, but please go ahead to instruct staff to proceed with this, because desperately needed in our community.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Chapman has a question for you.
Thank you, Sally, for coming in. So you mentioned the buildings that aren't being built, but this bylaw that's being proposed wouldn't actually address that.
Sorry,
yeah, you mentioned those 3 houses on Madison.
Sorry, what I meant was, I know, it's unrelated. I'm just saying if you're talking about trying to work out how to stop this homeless problem and this housing problem, which we all agree is desperately in need of provision, without saying City of Kitchener is supposed to be providing money for housing, which we know they're not, because that's not their job, it's the region. We're saying, look at your rules, and is there any way of ensuring that people who get development permission don't just board up houses and leave them vacant for years and years and years. Right. Sorry, I didn't make that very clear.
Okay, that's good.
But it's unrelated to this one, I do realize it's by law. Next one.
Thank you. I imagine you'll come back this evening when we talk about this.
Yes.
Yeah, so
yes.
I might have more questions then.
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair Snyder, and thank you for coming in, Sally, and presenting to us. You mentioned it, and my question was already answered, but I just want to hear again why the association felt it was necessary to advocate on behalf of these individuals in these 5 or 6 units, because, like you said, most of the time, you know, our heads are kind of not really where they should be as far as the issues that are around us in society. And, you know, you indicated you have a privileged life, and there are those who don't. And so, again, why did the association feel it was necessary to assist these individuals in these units?
I actually chaired, we've had a changeover in Cedar Hills neighbourhood group, and I chaired the meeting when this issue first came up. And, I mean, I've lived in Cedar Hills since 1981, and I chose to live there and raise 4 kids there because it's a genuinely diverse area where people care for each other. And we have very mixed forms of housing. I think at that meeting, there were several tenants who had just recently, as in the last week or 2, got these notices. And the impact of them telling us what they were facing shocked all of us. And as someone who's, at the old end of the spectrum, I was so impressed how there was not one person who didn't support a motion to support these people in any way we could. They are people you see on the street, people you meet, people you know, but you don't necessarily know what kind of housing they're in or even where they live other than in the community. And you see, and there was one woman who, she and her partner were there. She has major health issues and cannot work. Her husband, this is a very young couple, her husband does, or her partner does. They don't know what's going to happen to them. And that's the kind of thing, however much I say we live in a diverse area, we get sheltered from the immediate impact of that because no one's going to take my housing. But they will. I mean, there's a family forming refugees with several, I think 4 or 5 children. What will happen to them? There's nothing, and I have made phone call after phone call after phone call to try and connect with the owners. They're in Mississauga. We hear from their planners, and they give us planning talk. But we cannot talk to owners to say, why are you doing this? Look what you're doing. How can we work with you to make this not happen? So that's what's been motivating me personally, and I believe all the other people in our community.
Okay, there's no further questions. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Marion Markham.
Hi there. I'm Mo Markham, and can you hear me okay? I stand before you for the second time this year, advocating for affordable housing. I'm a longtime downtown resident and a senior, and I lost my housing a year and a half ago to a fire. Very affordable housing, and a year and a half on, I still am unstable in terms of my housing. I still don't know where I'm going to be living next. I have housing right now. Physically, it isn't housing that works for me because of my physical limitations. And the stress that I have undergone in the last year and a half, just constantly searching for housing, has been horrendous and has had a lot of effect on me physically. I understand myself to be quite privileged in terms of not ending up on the street after I lost my housing. I have friends and family. I have pension income. I have good references, and still I've not been able to find what I need for housing. I believe that I'll just, before I forget, I will just go to what Debbie was asking earlier, Councillor Chapman was asking earlier in terms of intensification. And I think what Mr. de Groot spoke of as well, I don't understand why our government continues to allow affordable housing to be taken away when we are in a housing crisis. I support this motion, and I believe that it is necessary to ensure that the people who are displaced are not displaced as much as they will be without this motion. At the same time, I believe that we need to use the other sites that already exist first and not keep approving the destruction of affordable housing. After that place that I moved to after the fire was sold, and I accepted cash for keys. All of that money has been wasted now in my continued search for affordable housing and on the housing that I currently have that I can't afford. When I moved into after the fire, after searching for months, I ended up paying 2.5 times what I was paying at my apartment on Benton that burned. That is completely unacceptable. And that's just the way things are these days. I never imagined that in my 60s I would be spending all of this time looking for housing, and I don't think that that's acceptable. And I know that many of these people are very vulnerable, as we've heard. They're seniors, they're families with children, they're refugees, etc. And we can't keep allowing this to happen. And I don't think that folks who elected council wanted them to continue to choose businesses and corporations. To the question of who should be paying for this, I believe that the corporations and businesses who are building this housing, who are monetizing our housing, should be paying for most of it. I also believe that governments should be contributing to the solution in whatever way is possible. I didn't lose my housing because of the failure of our governments, but the fact that I've been a year and a half with unstable housing is, I believe, due to what our governments at all levels are not doing and are not doing enough of, and that's protecting those of us who are vulnerable and needing to be protected and have safeguards if we do lose our housing, safeguards such as this motion. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. I think what is really important, well, one of the very important points that I think you're bringing to us here today is the fact that seniors, you've got a pension, but there are many seniors on a fixed income that whose pensions may not exist, or if they have one, they may not increase with the rate of inflation, right? So I think that's really important, and I think, it's something we really have to think about when we're looking at all the different tools that we have, and this just happens to be one of the tools that are available to us. So thank you for coming in.
Absolutely. My housing costs increased to 2.5 times, but my income did not change that much, for sure. It didn't change, period. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
That's okay. I was going to ask her a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good?
I thought you were asking someone else to speak, not. I apologize.
Thank you for coming in again, and thank you for giving us your perspective. And I do like the questions with regards to where the funding should be, because I think as a municipality we are doing our best to solve an issue that's rather significant with a very limited capacity for us to raise the dollars needed. So I just wanted to comment and say I agree with you. I think the higher levels of government who are actually responsible for these things should be able to come to the table and provide significant dollars, because we're talking about individuals on ODSP and pensions and all that stuff. Those are issues that the city doesn't deal with, but they're on a federal level. So I do respect that.
I will take it back to, however, this is the second time I've been here, and the last time council chose for the business rather than for affordable housing. So I do believe that council has a part to play in this, in terms of passing motions like this, and in terms of stopping the bleeding that is happening to affordable housing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Michaud, question of the delegation? Okay. So thank you. We're moving on to questions of staff. Councillor Davey is had queued in for questions of staff, so we'll take Councillor Davey first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Fay. Thank you, staff, for the good work on this. I do recall part of the motion was the motion I brought forward back in, I believe it was January, was suggestions in terms of advocacy to the province. Is there going to be, when you guys are going back to engage with the development community on this, or is there intention to maybe bring back some suggestions there at that time?
So through the chair, there is some language in the staff report that suggests that there are opportunities for council, should they wish to advocate to other orders of government in the areas where we currently do not have any legislative authority to pass any tools. The staff report outlines that area, the one clear area where we lack tools is in the area of evictions due to renovations.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. So we'll have to do some advocacy in that, and actually I'll save it for my comments, but I would like to move this at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davey. Next question is from Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, and thank you, staff, for this report. I'm curious as to any information on how this worked for the other cities. Toronto, I think, was it 2007, implemented this. And is there any information on how it's worked for them? I think this is a great report. I think it's a great concept. I'm just leery of giving people false hopes with what's in it. Without a lot more work, of course, than lobbying at the provincial level.
Through you, Chair, I can offer at least some input on this. So the three municipalities, at least in Ontario context, again, are Toronto, Mississauga, and Oakville. Oakville is very new. It's very fresh. It's difficult to assess at this point. Toronto's been in place for quite a bit more time, since I believe 2006. Over that period, as I think you heard earlier, it was about 5,000 units that have been effectively replaced. obviously talking at a very different scale than a Kitchener or even those other two 905 municipalities. And then Mississauga, just even anecdotally having worked there quite a bit ourselves as Parcel, fairly limited uptake to date, but again, more in the camp of Oakville. So it's a bit of an apples to oranges, unfortunately, because there's just not that much of a sample, so to speak. But I think maybe to offer that there are material challenges to its uptake, but not to suggest it's not worthwhile.
Oh, can you cue back in? Sorry.
So is this something that perhaps the municipalities could lobby together for more pressure on the provincial, federal level? Because I'm not sure how much the municipalities can have a big impact. Obviously, it's in evidence to what you've just said. It's not a huge impact since 2006 for Toronto.
Again, through you, Chair, I would tend to agree. I defer to other members of staff here if they have other opinions on the matter, but I'd say it's kind of chalk that up to a similar dynamic across the full housing crisis dynamic, right? It's just, again, this is kind of one piece of the puzzle, and so absolutely there may be opportunity to identify that and move it up the chain, so to speak.
Thank you.
Mr. Stevens would also like to comment.
Thank you, Chair. From a staff perspective, part of our request is to work with our local advocacy groups as well as groups that work in this space every day and with the development industry. We are confident that when we come back with a rental replacement bylaw in the first quarter of 2024, we can provide some suggestions for some advocacy. We see this as a leadership opportunity to be the fourth municipality in Ontario. So while there may be some benefit with working with other municipalities, I think that we're further along in this process, and we want to make sure that we're able to implement the rental replacement bylaw in the first quarter of next year. So we can certainly work with our colleagues across the province, but I think we want to make sure that we can remain independent enough that we can control our timing on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. And I don't disagree with that, but I do think that there's strength in numbers. And as far as municipalities go, if you have 3 or 4 municipalities doing a call to action on this, I think it's a lot more effective and could be actually expedited a lot faster. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair Schneider, and thank you to staff and to the delegates for presenting today. And I'm extremely happy with the staff recommendation of option 3. I do have 2 questions. One's not related necessarily to this, but do we have any mechanisms or any power to maintain the pre-2018 rent control if a building is demolished that was built before that, it's raised again? Do we have any power to maintain that?
Through the chair, no, we do not. The Municipal Act is quite clear. What the rental replacement bylaw tool does is it looks at what the current rents are and what the current tenant relationship is. So although we wouldn't be able to implement a rent control measure, we would be able to lock in rentals that are equivalent to what's being paid now.
Okay, I figured that was the answer, but thanks for clarifying. And lastly, just for clarification, the replacement units must remain rental for 10 years. Does that also include until the tenant moves out?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Deneau. Mayor Brvanovic.
Thanks very much, and just really wanted to touch on the question of advocacy and say I think as this gets finalized with after the phase of consultation with the industry and so on, then I think it is something we could take to the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus as well as to AMO and look to get some advocacy done through both of those mechanisms. But in the meantime, Mr. Chair, I just want to thank staff for all of the great work that they did on this, Councillor Davey for bringing the motion forward in the first place, and all of the delegations that came in this evening to be supportive of this.
Great, thank you. Councillor Owaduni.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to also say first thank you to staff for this for the great work that you've put in. I just have a few questions here. So let's say it is the first quarter of next year, and we have pushed this through option 3, so to speak, and we're working with a particular developer through an application, and they're not necessarily in compliance. They just want to do things their way. Just want to get your thoughts. How much authority do we have at that point to be able to say, okay, because you're not following through with this, we're not going to approve this process? I just want to get an idea and hope people also have a realistic understanding of the power through this.
Through you, Mr. Chair, once the rental replacement bylaw is in effect and in force, that would be a bylaw that would require compliance. Okay. So exceptions to that, we haven't contemplated that, and that's something probably we will work with our colleagues in legal to understand. But at this time is our intention that the bylaw would require compliance, and new applications that are filed after the bylaw is in place would be subject to such bylaw.
Okay, so if a developer, suppose, say they're going to OLT or something to be able to appeal something like this. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of this from my layman perspective on this.
Yes, through the chair. So there would be appeal mechanisms to any bylaw established under the Municipal Act. So we can, maybe that's something for us to take away and talk to our colleagues in legal, and when we bring it back, we'll be able to prepare to fully answer that question.
Thank you. I do think that is important, because if we're going in to pass this, it's important that we're able to think through all those parameters so we get a better understanding. And listeners and individuals who came in to provide delegation as well, able to get a better understanding of that. My second question, earlier on you said this is a piece of the puzzle. I would love a 30,000 feet view of what are some other areas that you feel could be part of this puzzle long term, and how can we support around this area?
So
and you're smiling. So.
Through the chair, as we mentioned in our opening remarks, this is kind of a steep learning curve for us in planning who are used to dealing with the matters under the Planning Act. So we are learning, and we are talking to as many folks as we can to help us understand the picture. Legislatively, the only tool that we currently have is the one that we're recommending Council consider directing us to implement through a bylaw. That being said, we're happy to continue conversations, and we're recommending that Council authorize us to continue conversations with advocates, the development industry, the community, and other stakeholders to understand what we can do. We have a really good working relationship with the development industry. Those conversations usually yield some fruitful results. If there's things that we can do through our development review and approvals process to secure tenant protection, then we'll look for those opportunities through the conversations with the development industry as well as other advocates.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
Okay. After the pause in the drilling, we'll go to Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for this report. It's most welcome. But I do have a question. Like, I'm looking at the resolution or the motion that came forward in January, and I'll just read one of the therefore clauses. It says, therefore be it further resolved that staff be directed to work with community stakeholders to make recommendations and deliver on tools and best practices that may be implemented immediately. Tools that may require additional development, possibly as part of Kitchener's official plan review, and suggested advocacy to other orders of government where support may be outside of our jurisdiction, and report back prior to the end of 2023. So I guess my question is, can we just adopt a bylaw today? Like, does more study need to be done? You know, we've got the examples of Toronto, Mississauga, and Oakville. We've got the report from Parcel and from Chris here. Why do we have to keep delaying this, I guess, is my question. Like, I think we've got the option there, right? So,
So through the chair, to Councillor Chapman, thank you for the question. I think there's more conversations that need to be had with the community and with our industry partners. As you know, the planning team has had a very heavy workload over the past year, and so we have started a lot of that dialogue, but there are more conversations to be had and more nuances to learn about. We do know from our legal department there are some parts of rental replacement bylaw that are ambiguous and that we can study further and sort of craft and make it a made-in-Kitchener solution. So I think we do want to rely from the knowledge we've gained from our work with Parcel, continue the dialogue with our community partners, and make sure that we've developed an approach that will work for us in Kitchener going forward, and give ourselves the next 2 to 3 months to bring that back to you and be confident in the work that we're delivering to Council.
okay. Can you give us any specifics of those things that would make it Kitchener rather than just something out of the Municipal Act?
Sorry, Mr. Reedman.
Through the chair, and so we wanted to come to council today to outline options that were available. We know that this will have an economic impact on development overall, and so we want to make sure that we're not totally shutting down new supply in our community. And so part of the intent was to check in with council today to understand where council was looking to direct, through this next phase of work, and then report back to council. And so we need to take a multi-step approach to come forward. So bringing up bylaw today would be premature.
Okay. Can I ask, are there any other municipalities that are considering this right now that we know of? And I don't know if, Chris, you're best to respond to that.
Through you, Chair, sorry, just to seek clarification whether the other municipalities are currently advancing in parallel, like not yet in full force and effect. Not that I'm aware of in the Ontario context. Oakville's the latest, literally as of this year, 2023. They were the latest to join the fold, so to speak. Just ear to the ground based on our other clientele. I know others, predominantly in BC, are looking to initiate similar processes, but not this far along the road, similar to Kitchener.
Okay, thank you. And is this bylaw available only to lower tier municipalities, or is it also available to the region?
Through the chair, to lower tier municipalities as the Development Approval Authority.
So it's either us or not at all, right? Yeah. Okay. I think that might be the end of my questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you. I just want to clarify the one question that Councillor Chapman brought up, because if it's on a regional road, it still falls within the Kitchener, City of Kitchener, so it still falls under the bylaw, correct? Okay, that's why I just wanted to have that clarification. I guess my question is with regards to, as Mr. Reedman had just brought up, because that was one of my concerns, is dealing with the economic development and how this would have the impact. Are we looking at how we can fund this program through economic development? Because this really is going to have, I think, a big part to play in this bylaw.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the model that we're envisioning is to have the developer fund the cost of the cost of the rental replacement. So whether that be temporary accommodations and move back in, or offsite accommodations. So similar to inclusionary zoning, we have to look to see what is the overall economic impact and a pro forma of a development application. So Parcel has given us some advice. We know that there are some examples where the margins are thinner, and that likely could mean that a site that's currently rental, and if the more rental units existing, the least likely it would be to redevelop. But in our case, we looked at all of the data, and we know that there would be maybe 2 to 3 instances where a rental replacement bylaw would have applied, and based on the number of units being demolished and the number of units being replaced, it would be within a financially feasible model. So we do think that there is opportunity here, An important piece of this is working with the Kitchener Development Liaison Committee and our industry partners to understand their performance, and we are working with them in the new year on some financial analysis. With inclusionary zoning coming, as well as rental replacement, those are costs that are added to a development. So we certainly want to continue to increase our housing supply, but we want to make sure that we can also have these protections in place. So working closely with the industry and our community partners is vital in the next couple of months.
Okay. I mean, yeah, the ones that I have most concern about are, I'm not too concerned about those developments that are going to be 30-plus stories or anything like that. What I'm concerned about is something that we've always been advocating around here is the missing middle. And again, I find that this could be one of those limiting factors where we're adding something to, the missing middle, which is their financial models are, less wiggle room, so to speak. And so that's my concern, and that's where I would like us to look at. If we're going to go this route, then we should be able to provide some form of economic support or development with our economic development and with regards to that.
Okay, Councillor Michaud, further questions? Okay, comments? And Councillor Chapman has some more questions?
Yes, sorry, I just had one other question about the appealability of it. So I recall when we first were working with inclusionary zoning, it was not appealable. So you're saying this is appealable. Could we get some examples, and not today, but maybe for council, the council meeting next week, of cases where it has been appealed in Toronto, which seems to be the city with the most number of retained units? Please. Yeah. Thanks.
So I don't know who wants to, no one's coming up in the queue here. Okay, here we go. Thank you.
Through the chair, sorry, I was nodding, but yes, we can get that information and provide it to you.
Great. Okay, no further questions? So moving on to comments now. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I said it loud enough or clear enough earlier that I really appreciate this report and all the work that has been put into this, and that is going to have to go into this to make a difference. So your work is not gone unnoticed, and I really appreciate your hard work. Thank you.
Maybe you just want to repeat that it was a little hard to hear. Sorry. With all the drilling there, the dentistry that's going on upstairs. One sec. Okay, here we go.
Thank you. I just reiterate this again. I'm not going to go verbatim, but thank you for all your hard work that you put into this. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair. And once again, thank you for this report, and I think it's an important part of the process. It's one of many tools, I think, that government, not just municipal, but also provincial and federal, can use to solve the issue we have, and that's housing affordability, which leads to homelessness. And, we talk about on a weekly basis people living in our parks, living in our, on the streets and forests where you can't even see them. And, I think we can attribute most or a number of those to mental health or addiction issues. But I have no doubt in my mind a lot of those are due to the lack of affordable housing. And when we eliminate one unit, like some of our delegates have mentioned, where do they go? They go on the streets, or they live in their cars. The CPP maximum is 1742, combined with the GIS is 1928. So if we're asking seniors to live in a unit where it's over what the average rent is, the average rent is 1928. The maximum of OAS and GIS is 1742. And so where are they going to live? And so I think we need protections, and this is, again, one of those tools that we can use to enable that we allow people who are most vulnerable to live and not have to worry where they're going to live come 6 months when they know their unit is being evicted. To just mention or comment on Ryan's talk about rent eviction bylaws. Unfortunately, that's not in our purview. I wish it was, but that is a provincial legislation, and so I've mentioned this to my own MPP earlier this year, and she point blankly told me the government's not going to touch it. Those were her words at that point in time. And so I think we need to still continue through AMO on big city mayors to advocate that we need, like BC has, actual rent eviction legislation that protects everybody. And so I'm in full support of this, of the option number 3 brought forward by the staff. And again, thank you very much for your hard work on this.
Thank you, Councillor Note. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank staff, but I also want to thank all the community organizations that have contributed to create this report. And I think that part of the puzzle is very important as well. I do look forward to receiving a further update or a bylaw draft in the new year. I'm really pleased to see the boldness of option 3 that staff is proposing we advance. And I think, I'm sorry it can't come sooner, quite frankly, but I think we're going in the right direction. And I think we need to retain affordable housing units at all costs, and this will give us a tool that will permit that in a way that we haven't been able to up to this point. So I think it's great. I'm really pleased to see what's being proposed here, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Schneider. I can support this bylaw, but I want to be pretty clear. I feel that that we've heard from residents that we're part of the equation with regards to this, and regardless of where we are able to get our funding and all that stuff in that aspect, I think we should look at this more of as an economic development. I think we need to subsidize, if not pay for some of this, because I think if we put the burden solely on the development world, I feel like this won't go anywhere. And so if we're really serious about wanting to just protect these units, I think we have to put in our share and support that financially, and that's why I've been talking about having that with economic development. I think this is an economic development generation for perspective in my mind, because again, we only have a limited supply of land, and if we keep putting the burden on those that actually do build the units and create another layer of red tape, which this is what this is, another layer of red tape, we will see those significant decreases in development. And then the calls again will come out to let's build outside of the country sideline because that's where it's a little more cheaper. And then we're going to hear those arguments. So we can't have everything without looking at all the serious consequences that for every decision we make. So if we're going to get serious, we need to support this in some kind of financial aspect.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. Just before we go to Councillor Davey, who moved the motion and was the councillor who originally asked staff to come up with this, I just want to make my comments and say thank you for all the great comments around the horseshoe. There's not much more I can add to it. I would like to thank all our delegations for coming in. I'm optimistic about this. As we have seen developers come before council with their proposals, we have seen an openness and a willingness for them to do what they can to help with affordable housing. I think we need to be clear that it's not developers that build the affordable housing. The affordable and supportive housing is built by other levels of government, but I've seen a lot of support from within our development industry to help out with that. So I'm fully confident in our staff who have done great things, working together with developers and other stakeholders to get good things happening in our city. So with that, I'd like to, the final comments to Councillor Davey.
Thank you very much, Chair Schneider. Yeah, I want to begin by thanking staff for the work in this, and then the consultant's report was great as well. I'm a data-driven guy, and there was a whole lot of numbers and charts which helps support this. The challenge here is that we're not in an affordable housing supply crisis only. We are in that, but also a general housing supply crisis. And we need to make sure that we are careful that in the steps that we take, we aren't sacrificing one for the other. So I'm comfortable we're looking at another few months of time to make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's to make sure we get this right. And I think that's prudent. I do also want to say, when it comes back, I'm going to be looking for that advocacy piece. Like I agree with Councillor Ioannidis on some of his comments there. And I'd also, like even Councillor Deneau referencing, that, addiction, for example, is a big issue in terms of affordability, in terms of homelessness. But it's so bad out there right now. Becoming hooked on drugs is a way to escape situations like not being able to afford a home. So I think there's a real trickle-down effect when it comes to affordability. The last thing I wanted to say, just when this comes back, when it comes to advocacy, I really think there's an insurance-based model that could apply here, where developers can kick in an amount of money, and the province, which is their purview, ideally would kick in an amount of money as well and handle this almost as like an insurance-based system to help those that are displaced. So I'll be looking for that when it comes back to the advocacy piece. But again, thank you so much to staff, thank you to the consultant, and happy to support this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davey. Well, that's all the comments. It has been moved by Councillor Davey that staff be directed to engage the development industry and community stakeholders on a rental replacement bylaw. The staff continue to work with community stakeholders to explore additional tools that may be within Kitchener's jurisdiction to support that transitioning of displaced residents, and that staff continue to collaborate with the region of Waterloo on shared solutions related to the rental housing, eviction, and displacement. So, although, okay. Yes. A recorded vote has been called. So, Mayor Ravanovich and Councillor Davey, who are attending virtually, I guess a hand up would indicate your support. Yeah, so we do have Mayor Ravanovich and Councillor Davey. Yeah, they're showing a hands up, and do you want to, yeah, would you like a verbal? Okay.
I'm in support.
Okay, Councillor Davey, just a verbal, please.
I support as well.
Okay, great. You're there. Oh, maybe, yeah. I didn't, mine doesn't show up. I should probably. Okay. I voted for you, proxy.
Thanks, Chair Schneider.
There we go. Okay, so, yeah, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay. And with that, that's all the items that we have for community and, yeah. So, motion to adjourn. Councillor Deneau. All those in favor? And meeting is adjourned. Thank you.